Hey there, and welcome to RachAquarelle and to my holiday art series where I'm doing a Christmas or holiday or winter themed project each day between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And today I'm going to be making another cute little greeting card. This one is also going to be very simple, very fun, very whimsical, something that we don't have to worry about precision or anything like that. So it should be one where you can just kind of sit down and relax and play a little. And whenever I do cards, I like to roll up a little bit of masking tape and just put it in between the cards so it's not constantly flying up on me. And this is a template that is available to you for free. There's a link down in the description. And basically what I did was try to think of some nice holiday card sayings, and then I put those in different fonts so that you can kind of look through and decide which one fits your project best. And you can use this over and over and over again, as I will be doing. So this is just to make life a little bit easier, which is always good. For this card, I'm going to do a Deck the Halls theme. So I'm using my transfer paper and I am just applying some pressure with my pencil to make the carbon on the carbon paper transfer down onto my watercolor paper. And if you've watched my other videos, you've seen me do this many times. It's very easy, simple, and carbon paper is incredibly affordable. I think it used to be really common when people used typewriters because that's how you could make an easy copy with your typewriter. You would just put it underneath in between two pieces of paper, and then you would essentially be typing on two pieces of paper at once. So kind of cool. And I'm just going to sketch out this design, and then this is also going to be available to you as a free template. The link, of course, will be in the description, and I'll make it a little bit darker for you, and then you'll be able to print it off, and then you can also use this to transfer the design onto your card if you would like. I'm kind of just winging it on mine. Now, I often do like to sketch ahead of time, but I felt like I could probably handle something like this because there's not going to be too much going on. Again, I want it to be very simple and whimsical. And we're going to use a very limited color palette with this as well, just some greens and some reds. And we'll use just a little bit of ink to make this look kind of doodly. Okay, so I'm just about done with this sketch, and then I'm going to take it and make a scan directly from this card, and that's what you'll have as a template. So there is the sketch, and we're back. So now I'm going to get to start painting. Yay! Getting my watercolors out. Making sure everything is on screen. I've zoomed in my camera a little bit, hoping that that will help you see a little bit better what I'm doing. And then I'm just going to grab some water and get the brushes that I plan to use. For this project, I'm going to be using two of my smaller brushes. Now, I don't ever use like super small brushes. I don't even own any, I don't think. So two kind of on the smaller side brushes will do the trick for this. We're going to leave the whole background white, and I'm going to start out with my greens. And one thing that I'll do with both my greens and my red is that I will kind of shift the color. So it's going to be lots of greens, but I'm going to try to vary the color between like a lot of blues in the green and lots of yellows in the green, and then, you know, some medium greens as well. So I'm going to start out with this kind of bluish green. I'm going to keep these colors relatively light. I don't want too much saturation in here. And kind of the most important thing here is just I'm going to paint one leaf at a time so that I can start merging variations of greens into each leaf, because I don't want this to be flat, and I also don't want it to be overly complicated. So it's important to be able to paint each leaf while it's still wet. Now I'm going to go in while this leaf is still wet and just start adding some ultramarine blue. And for the greens, I'm pretty much going to limit my colors to just ultramarine blue and my lemon yellow. So I won't use any of my other yellows or my other blues. And I'm just going to, again, shift the amount of yellow versus blue in the mixes. So now I'm going in with more yellow to kind of let that yellow mingle with the more bluish greens. And this will create a very subtle effect, but I think it'll be a really nice look overall. And it doesn't matter, you don't have to go and look at references of leaves to see, how the coloration is. We're just going to kind of wing it and have fun. So on this one, I'm starting out with more of the yellowish green, and then I'll start adding in more of the blue. So that's kind of how I'll approach this. Whatever, balance of green I start out with, I will finish that area with kind of the opposite. So if I start out with more yellow, I'm going to finish with more blue. If I start out with more blue, I'll finish with more yellow. And if I'm using kind of this medium green, then I can choose either one to kind of start intermingling the colors. And I'm not going to worry about having all of these lines precise or perfectly smooth. They're just going to be what they are. And if you are using watercolors that are not too saturated, little, wobbles and squiggles and imperfections will not even be perceptible. So again, just kind of mixing up the greens. And you can already see that it's giving a really nice effect. Kind of that, just watercolory, whimsical, playful effect where, things are perfectly imperfect. I think that's one of my favorite things about watercolor is, obviously the more you do it, the more control you develop. And also, the more you allow it to kind of just do its own thing and not try to control it too much. So it's really fun to start finding that balance. And trust me, I know that that's not easy. And it's almost like, it feels almost like it's just a myth when you're starting. You hear people say that and you kind of don't believe it because you haven't had that experience yet. But trust me, it does take some time and some practice and just kind of, getting used to what this medium does and allowing those mistakes to happen. I know that I used to try to correct every single unintentional mark that I made in watercolor. And what I learned is that the times that I didn't correct things, I actually came to like those parts of the painting the most. And so now it's a little bit easier to just kind of trust that process and let things happen. So really the only things that I will correct is, if I accidentally, and I do this a lot and I think I actually do it in this card where while the paint is wet, I accidentally touch it with my hand and kind of, smudge the paint around. And so I'll try to fix that, of course, but anything else, I think it's important just to kind of let it be and let things happen. So we're just about done with the greens. Right now I'm just using the last little bit of green here to get these little twigs. These are going to be red berries. And so those will be red and just that little twig connecting the berries to, see, that's where I smudged some paint. And a lot of times I won't see that right away, but this time I actually did. So what I'm doing, I'm just using some water. I know the water looks green, but it's so diluted that it's really not going to color your paper. So if you smudge some paint and it's still wet, dab some water on it and then use your paper towel just to kind of lift up the pigment that got smudged. Other than stuff like that, I really try hard not to correct or try to be overly controlling with what I do in watercolor. All right, so on this ornament, I'm going to start out with a wash of permanent rose, and I want to make sure that it's not too dark so that I am able to add more pigment in later in areas that I want. And I just left a little sliver of white for, you know, the effect of like a reflection or shine on it. And then I'm going to go in with more pigment over here on the right hand side and just kind of drop that pigment in and let it intermingle as it wants to. And then I'm using my warmer red, which is New Gamboge. That's what I'm using. I'm going to use that because it's very, very, very pigmented. And I'm just going to drop that in where it's still wet and just let that intermingle with that permanent rose a little bit. But I'm just applying it kind of sparingly. I don't want to put it all over the ornament. And again, I'm not thinking about any kind of actual reference, like what an actual ornament might look like or how it's reflecting. I'm just going to kind of leave it very whimsical and loose, and it doesn't really matter if it's true to life. Now I'm going to do essentially the same thing on these berries. I'm starting out with the permanent rose, and I'm starting out pretty light, and then I'll just drop a little bit of that really, really strong, almost orangish red in there while they're still wet, and just kind of let it happen. They're small, so there's a lot less that I can do as compared to that ornament. So I'm just going to let those be very simple, and I'm not going to overwork them. So each cluster of berries, I think in each place I have just 3 of them together. Just going to start out with some light permanent rose, and then while it's still wet, I'll go in with a little more of the New Gamboge, which is my warm red. New Gamboge is made by Daniel Smith. It's a very, very strong pigment. I don't use it very often. I really like permanent rose for a lot of things, and so yeah, I don't go through a lot of the New Gamboge. So now I'm just dropping that New Gamboge into the berries. And this is pretty much going to do it for the watercolor portion of this project. The rest I'm going to be doing with India ink. And I'll just get my watercolors cleaned up here. I always like to do that. I don't like things just kind of sitting and being dirty, because then next time I go to paint, I have to clean before I paint. So I like to make things easy on myself and just kind of clean up as soon as I'm finished painting. That just makes it easier to sit down the next time and start playing around with some watercolors. And while I'm waiting for these areas on my card to dry completely, because I do want them to dry completely before I move on. So I have some time, and I'm just going to kind of tidy up my palette as well, because I tend to spill the colors all over the place and it kind of drives me crazy. I can be a little bit perfectionistic about it too, so I'm going to try not to do that. Sometimes I end up making more of a mess than I actually had to begin with. So, okay, that should do it for that. And the reason I want to make sure that this card is completely dry before I do any of the inking is just because I don't want the ink to bleed into the watercolor. Now, a lot of times when I do inking, I use India ink because it is waterproof. I will be using India ink for this project, but it really doesn't matter if it's waterproof or not, because we're going to be applying ink on top of watercolor. We're not going to be applying watercolor or any kind of water on top of this ink. So even if you don't have waterproof ink, it's totally okay as long as you're applying it on top of your dry watercolor. And I'm using my dip pen, which is just my favorite. You do not have to use a dip pen, of course. Use any pen that you want. And what I'm going to be doing, I'm not going to be like fully outlining any of this. I'm just going to add a few loose lines. I'm also not going to try to trace the watercolor exactly. I'm letting there be some gap between the watercolor and the lines, so there will be like a little bit of white space in between. And that's just to make it look a little bit more like a doodle, a little bit more fun and whimsical and loose. And for each leaf, I'm for the most part just applying like one line on one side of the leaf. I'm not outlining the entire leaf. And then I'll just make that string holding the ornament extremely simple. And don't, again, be too perfectionistic about your lines. Just kind of let them be as they want to be. Don't try to trace things exactly. Don't try to make your line a specific way. Just kind of move your pen quickly. And I think that's really the best way to get a nice line that feels very whimsical and carefree, is to actually be whimsical and carefree with it. And then same for the ornament. I'm not going to worry about tracing the ornament. And a big reason why I didn't do the ink before I did the watercolor was because if I had done all of this inking and then put watercolor on top, I would just kind of naturally feel like I needed to fill in that whole space. And I really want those gaps of white. And that's a lot easier to achieve if you just wait to do your inking. Otherwise, you're just going to be constantly fighting that tendency to, color in the lines with your watercolor. All right, so yeah, this was a very simple project, but I think that you will agree that it's very kind of elegant looking in its own way, very whimsical and elegant. And that's it. So I really hope that you enjoyed this cute little project. Again, there are templates for both the lettering and for this design. Actually, the lettering is going to be on the template for this design, but I have lots of free templates for you, and I have lots of tutorials that I'm doing right now that I hope that you'll check out. I hope that you might consider subscribing to my channel, and please leave me comments with anything that you might like to see. Thank you so much, and bye!